My name is Ellie, and I live in bustling, yet slightly noisy New York. Every day is dull and routine, and like countless ordinary housewives, I revolve around my husband, children, and household chores. In the hustle and bustle of the city, I have gradually lost myself, and my former dreams and passions seem to have been buried by the dust of time. It was a lazy, sunny afternoon. As usual, I was tidying up the living room. The doorbell suddenly rang. I put down what I was doing and, somewhat puzzled, went to open the door. Outside the door was a strange man in a black tuxedo. He had a stern face and a hint of mystery in his eyes. He bowed politely to me, handed me an exquisite envelope, and then turned and left without leaving a word. I opened the envelope with curiosity, and inside was a beautiful invitation to a noble feast. The paper of the invitation felt soft and thick, and it gave off a faint, yet somewhat strange aroma as if from a distant and mysterious place. The patterns on it were exquisite and ancient, like some kind of mysterious symbol telling an untold story. I wanted to refuse without hesitation. This mysterious and strange invitation made me feel uneasy instinctively. But deep down, the curiosity that had long been eroded by life was stirring. I had not experienced anything new or exciting for too long. The dull routine of life day after day made me long for even the slightest excitement. So I began to prepare carefully. I rummaged through my wardrobe for a long time and finally chose a black backless long dress. When I put it on, I looked at myself in the mirror and felt a little strange. The long dress was cut just right, perfectly outlining my graceful figure, slender waist, and plump buttocks. Every curve exuded the charm of a mature woman. My long blonde hair draped down, shimmering with a charming luster in the light. A glimmer of anticipation also returned to my blue eyes. Finally, the day of the feast has arrived. New York at night is full of bright lights, but I have no time to admire the beauty of the city. With a mixture of trepidation and anticipation, I set off for the feast. My heart was pounding the whole way, not knowing what awaited me. But I knew that this decision might change my life, and I was ready to face the unknown. When I stood at the door of the feast, I took a deep breath and slowly walked in. The heavy door slowly closed behind me, as if to separate me from the outside world, and I officially entered this mysterious and alluring world. As the heavy door slowly closed behind me, it felt as if I had stepped into a completely different world. The bustling streets of New York, which were just now filled with cars and brightly lit, were now left behind, and in their place was a magnificent space filled with an eerie atmosphere. In the hall, the dim yellow light swayed uncertainly, as if manipulated by some invisible force, casting dappled shadows. On the walls hung ancient oil paintings, the eyes of the figures in the paintings as if following my every step, making me feel uneasy. The air was filled with a faint, indescribable smell, a mixture of the scent of ancient spices and a hint of blood, which was sickening but inexplicably fascinating. The guests were dressed in magnificent costumes and behaved with elegance, but there was an unspeakable coldness that was hard to hide. They gathered in groups of 2 or 3, whispering to each other in soft voices that carried a strange rhythm, as if they were chanting an ancient spell. I carefully navigated my way through the crowd, feeling like a lamb that had strayed into a pack of wolves. The stares around me were either curious, indifferent, or carried a hint of hidden desire. Just then, a tall female vampire caught my eye. She stood in the corner of the hall, as if shrouded in a light mist, making her seem even more mysterious. Her skin was so pale it was almost transparent, as if it would shatter with the slightest touch, and her bright red lips, like blood, formed a strong contrast with her pale skin. Her long, black hair falls like a waterfall, casually scattered over her shoulders, the ends slightly curled, adding a touch of lazy charm. She is wearing a tight-fitting red dress, the material of which looks extremely special and shimmers with an eerie luster in the light. The dress fits her body perfectly, showing off her curvy figure to the fullest. Her towering breasts, slender waist, and round buttocks were like works of art. Her long, straight legs looked even more seductive against the backdrop of the red dress. When her gaze turned to me, I couldn't help but shiver. What kind of eyes were those? Deep and cold, as if they could see right through me. The corner of her mouth lifted slightly, revealing a smile that was half smile, half mocking, half seductive. I subconsciously wanted to look away, but found that my gaze was captivated by her, unable to extricate myself. In this strange atmosphere, I felt an unprecedented sense of oppression. I knew that I had completely fallen into this mysterious and dangerous world, and that what awaited me ahead would be more unknown challenges and temptations. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down, while secretly warning myself to stay alert and not be confused by all this strangeness. In this suffocating and strange atmosphere, I tried to make my pace seem more relaxed, but my eyes were darting around the crowd, trying to find a corner where I could feel a little more at ease. But everything around me made me feel strange and scared. Those hidden glances felt like countless invisible hands, tightly wrapping around me. Just as I was at a loss for what to do, a melodious piece of music slowly began to play. It was like the sound of nature in this strangely silent hall. I subconsciously looked in the direction of the music, and just then, a gentleman vampire with a charming demeanor appeared in my line of sight. He was wearing a black tuxedo, tailored to fit his figure, making him look even more slender. The fabric of the tuxedo shined with a soft luster, complementing the elegant aura he exuded. His hair is jet black and shiny, neatly combed to one side, with a few strands falling carelessly in front of his forehead, adding a touch of nonchalance to him. He has deep eyes like a deep pool, so deep you can't see the bottom, and they shine with a mysterious and charming light. Beneath his high nose bridge are beautifully shaped lips, which are curling up into a devilish smile at the moment. That smile is like magic, instantly capturing my attention. He walked towards me with an elegant gait, each step carefully calculated, composed, and confident. When he reached me, he leaned slightly and extended his hand to me in an elegant and gentlemanly manner. "Beautiful lady, would you do me the honor of dancing with me?" His voice was deep and full of magnetism, as if it were coming from a distance, with a unique rhythm that made my heart beat faster involuntarily. I was a little flustered, my hands unconsciously gripping the hem of my skirt, and my heart was racing uncontrollably. My rational mind told me that this man in front of me was full of danger, and that I should refuse him and turn around to escape from this terrible place. But his deep eyes, his charming smile, and the dreamlike atmosphere around me made me, against my better judgment, nod my head and gently place my hand in his. His hand was cool but soft, and when our hands touched, an electric feeling ran through my body. He gently held my hand and led me to the center of the dance floor. Under his guidance, I gradually relaxed, and to the rhythm of the music, our bodies began to dance. His embrace was warm, in stark contrast to his cold hands. I could feel his breath gently brushing against my hair, and an unprecedented flutter spread through my heart. The guests around us seemed to be watching us, but I didn't care. In his embrace, I seemed to forget where I was, that I was already a married woman, and just immersed in the wonderful music and his gentle embrace. I knew that from this moment on, I had already been on the verge of this taboo, and what awaited me ahead would be an even more unpredictable future. The melodious music flowed like a babbling brook in this magnificent yet eerie hall, and I danced with the gentleman of the Blood Clan on the dance floor. Every one of his movements was extremely elegant, as if he had come out of an ancient picture scroll, and every move exuded charming charm. As the dance steps intertwined, our bodies grew closer and closer. His hand gently slid across my back. That seemingly casual touch was like an electric current that instantly spread throughout my body, making me tremble slightly. I could feel the strange temperature of his palm through the thin dress, which was both slightly cool and as if a ball of flame was burning on my skin. The surrounding air seemed to become more and more ambiguous, the dim yellow light casting a hazy shadow on us, and the whispers of the guests seemed to become distant and indistinct at this moment. The tall female vampire was still standing not far away, her gaze always fixed on us, her eyes with an elusive meaning, as if mocking, but also encouraging. Her bright red lips curled up slightly, revealing an expression that looked like a smile, as if she was silently saying something. The struggle in my heart was like a surging tide, coming in waves. I kept telling myself that I was a woman with a family, that I had a husband and children of my own, and that I could not give in to this forbidden temptation. However, the blood-sucking gentleman's deep eyes, his gentle embrace, and the intoxicating atmosphere around me were like an invisible net, trapping me tightly within and making it difficult for me to break free. His breath lingered on the tip of my nose, a mixture of ancient spices and mysterious power that intoxicated me. He whispered softly in my ear, his voice low and magnetic, like the sound of heavenly music, saying those heart-stopping words. I couldn't help but look up at his handsome face. When our eyes met, I felt as if I were looking at a whole new world, a world full of temptation and the unknown. In that moment, all reason and morality were cast aside, and desire spread like wildfire in my heart. I no longer thought about the consequences, no longer about my identity or my responsibilities. I just wanted to revel in the moment. I closed my eyes gently, pressed my body closer to his, and felt his heartbeat and breathing as if the whole world were just the two of us. With the rhythm of the music, our dance steps became faster and faster, and our emotions grew more and more intense. I knew that from that moment on, I had completely given into this forbidden desire, and this vampire feast would become a turning point in my life, leading me into an unknown and dangerous future. The music's rhythm became more and more intense, like my frantic heartbeat. In this extremely ambiguous atmosphere, the gentleman vampire and I danced more and more recklessly, as if everything around us had ceased to exist, leaving only our intertwined souls. When the song ended, our bodies did not part. His hand was still wrapped tightly around my waist, and his fingers lightly caressed my skin. The subtle touch made all my nerves tingle. He lowered his head slightly, and his hot breath sprayed on my neck, carrying a faint bloody scent that did not make me feel afraid, but instead made my heartbeat quicken. "Follow me," his voice was low and seductive, like a call from hell. Without hesitation, I let him take my hand and lead me to the remote corner of the hall. Along the way, guests cast curious or ambiguous glances, but I no longer cared. My heart and eyes were full of this mysterious and charming gentleman of the blood. We arrived in a dim corner, and the light around us grew even darker. There were only a few flickering candles casting dappled shadows. He gently pushed me against the wall, his hands on either side of me, trapping me in his embrace. His eyes burned with burning desire, and the moment we locked gazes, my reason completely collapsed. His lips slowly approached, and I could feel his breath getting closer and closer. My body began to tremble slightly, not sure if it was from nervousness or anticipation. Finally, his lips covered mine. At that moment, it felt as if an electric current had instantly spread throughout my body. My mind went blank, and all my thoughts were occupied by the sudden kiss. I knew it was betrayal, betrayal of my husband, betrayal of my family. But in the face of this strong desire, I could not help myself. His kiss was as passionate as a storm, with a primal lust and impulse that made me intoxicated. I could not help but respond to his kiss, and my hands tightly grasped his clothes as if I had grabbed a straw for help. Just then, I felt a cold gaze fall upon me. I opened my eyes slightly and saw that the tall female vampire had come near us without our noticing. She stood there quietly, her eyes flashing with a complex light, as if with jealousy and satisfaction. Her red lips were slightly open, as if she wanted to say something, but in the end she didn't make a sound. Under the female vampire's gaze, I did not stop my intimate actions with the gentleman vampire, but became even more daring. I was completely lost in the world of the two vampires, sinking into this forbidden pleasure and starting this immoral and unethical orgy. And I knew full well that from this moment on, I could never go back to the past. What awaited me would be unknown consequences and endless struggles. Just as I was indulging in the forbidden pleasure with the gentleman vampire, I suddenly became oblivious to my surroundings. A commotion suddenly broke out in the hall. The gentle and soothing music stopped abruptly, replaced by people's screams of alarm and the sound of panicked footsteps. I was shocked, and a strong sense of unease welled up in my heart. Instinctively, I wanted to break free from the gentleman vampire's embrace. But he held me tightly, and a flash of displeasure crossed his eyes, but it quickly returned to calm. "Don't worry, dear. It's just a minor incident," he said softly to comfort me, but I could not be as calm as he was. I tried hard to look in the direction of the commotion, and between the gaps in the crowd, I saw a familiar figure, my husband. His eyes were sharp, and he quickly locked onto me in the chaos of the hall. His face was red with anger, his hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white. He strode through the crowd and came towards us, each step like a step on my heart. I had never seen him look so angry before, and fear spread through me. "Ellie, what are you doing?" His voice resounded through the hall, full of anger and shock. The guests around them all quieted down, casting strange looks at them, and the sound of whispers echoed through the hall. I opened my mouth, trying to explain, but I found that I couldn't say a word, and my throat felt like it was blocked by something. The gentleman of the blood slightly frowned, blocking my body with his body, his eyes full of provocation, and facing my husband. "Sir, this is a noble feast. Please be careful with your words and actions." His voice was still low and elegant, but it faintly revealed a hint of menace. "Aristocrat?" My husband sneered. "You monsters, how dare you seduce my wife?" His voice was full of disgust and anger, and he tried to rush over. The guests around them let out a startled cry, and the scene became even more chaotic. I looked at the two people in front of me, who were on the verge of a fight, and my heart was filled with despair. I knew that I had made an unforgivable mistake. This feast, which was supposed to be full of excitement and temptation, had now turned into a nightmare. I have betrayed my husband and my family, and now I must face the consequences. The female vampire stood to one side, watching the whole thing with interest, a meaningful smile curling the corner of her mouth. Her eyes flicked back and forth between me, the gentleman vampire, and my husband, as if she were enjoying this wonderful farce. And yet, in the midst of this chaos, I felt more helpless and confused than ever before. I had no idea how this crisis would end, nor what my future would hold. The tension in the hall was at its peak, like a tight string that could snap at any moment. I stood in the middle, looking at the two men in front of me, my heart filled with mixed emotions. The feast had completely lost its taste in the face of the sudden crisis. The tension in the hall was so high that it felt like a spark could trigger an explosion. My husband glared at the gentleman from the vampire clan, his eyes burning with rage as if he wanted to devour him alive. The gentleman from the vampire clan maintained his elegant posture, but his clenched fists revealed his inner tension. "Let go of my wife," my husband roared, taking a step forward. The guests around them were so frightened that they backed away, making a clearing as if a life-and-death duel was about to take place here. The gentleman of the vampire clan, however, did not move an inch. He stood in front of me, leaning slightly forward, as if to protect me. "Sir, what you are doing is not at all gentlemanly." The vampire gentleman's voice remained calm, but the warning in it became stronger and stronger. "This is our world. You'd better not act rashly." I looked at the two men in front of me, my heart filled with pain and struggle. On one side was my husband, who I had been with day and night. We had had many sweet memories together, and he had worked hard for the family and cared for me. On the other side was the vampire gentleman who had led me into the abyss of lust. He had brought me passion and excitement like I had never experienced before, and I had lost myself in his embrace. "Ellie, come with me." My husband reached out to me, his eyes full of expectation and anxiety. "Let's go home and forget about all this." I hesitated, my feet as if nailed to the ground, unable to move an inch. I looked at the gentleman of the vampire clan, and a flash of panic crossed his eyes, before he looked at me firmly. "Don't leave me, Ellie. We were born for each other." His voice was low and gentle, as if there was some kind of magic, causing the scales in my heart to begin to tip. The guests around us were watching us, and the sound of whispers was unceasing. The female vampire stood aside, watching the scene with interest, with a hint of teasing in her eyes. I felt as if I were in the middle of a huge whirlpool, being pulled by two completely different forces, unable to make a decision. I finally spoke, but my voice trembled. I don't know. My tears were welling up in my eyes, and my heart was filled with conflict and pain. I knew that no matter which side I chose, I would surely hurt the other. Ellie, do you really want to abandon our family for this monster? My husband's voice carried a hint of despair. Think about our children. They can't live without you. Hearing the word, children, my heart ached. Yes, I still had children, and I couldn't let them lose their mother. But looking at the vampire gentleman's affectionate gaze, how could I bear to leave him? I felt utterly helpless and confused in the face of this difficult decision. Time seemed to have come to a standstill. I stood between the two men, unsure of which way to go, and the crisis, because of my indecision, became more and more confusing. Just as I was unable to make a decision in my agony and struggle, the female vampire, who had been standing quietly by, finally slowly took a few steps forward. Her posture was swaying and graceful, and every step carried an innate grace and charm, as if she were the master of this chaotic situation. It seems that this family farce is becoming more and more interesting. The female vampire's voice was like the chirping of a nightingale, crisp but with a hint of coldness, echoing through the silent and somewhat oppressive hall. Her gaze flickered between me, my husband, and the gentleman vampire, with an unfathomable gleam in her eyes. My husband looked at the female vampire with anger. "This is all a conspiracy by you monsters. What do you want?" His voice trembled with anger, and his hands were still clenched into fists, as if he was ready to attack these vampires at any time. The female vampire let out a light laugh, a smile as beautiful as an ice flower in the cold winter, but also full of coldness. "Oh, dear sir, don't get so worked up. This is just a little revenge." Her gaze fell on my husband, and a flash of resentment flickered in her eyes. "Do you remember what you did to my family many years ago?" Hearing this, my husband's face instantly turned pale, and a flash of panic flickered in his eyes. You are." His voice stuttered a little, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Yes, I am a member of the family you hurt back then." The female vampire's voice became cold and firm. "All these years, I have been waiting for an opportunity to make you taste the pain too. And your wife happened to become the instrument of my revenge." I stared with wide eyes, unable to believe what I had heard. It turned out that none of this was accidental, but a carefully planned conspiracy. I looked at the gentleman vampire. His eyes were also full of shock, and it was clear that he also did not know the female vampire's real purpose. "How could you do this?" I said to the female vampire, my voice trembling. "I have no grudges against you, so why are you doing this to me?" The female vampire sneered. "No grudges? Your husband killed my entire family for his own benefit, so of course I had to take it out on the person he cared about most." I looked at my husband again, my eyes full of disappointment and anger. "So it was all because of your past. Why did you have to drag me into this?" My husband was full of guilt, Ellie. I really didn't know it would turn out like this. What I did back then was a mistake of my life, but I never thought it would affect you." At this point, the atmosphere in the hall became even more complicated. My husband and the gentleman of the blood clan, who had been on the verge of a fight, were both a little overwhelmed by this unexpected turn of events. As for me, I felt even more pain and confusion in my heart. I never expected that this crisis, which seemed to have been caused by desire, would hide such a complicated web of grievances and romances behind it. I stood still, looking at everything in front of me, not knowing how to face this world full of lies and betrayal next. The atmosphere in the hall was like a block of ice, suffocating and oppressive. The words of the female vampire were like a sharp blade, cutting the already chaotic situation into even more pieces. My husband and the gentleman of the bloodsucking clan looked at each other, their eyes full of hostility, although not completely dissipated, but also a little more shock at the truth. "Enough!" I suddenly shouted, my voice echoing in the empty hall with a firmness that surprised even me. I was tired of all the lies and betrayals, tired of being dragged into this inexplicable revenge. I didn't want to be a pawn in someone else's revenge anymore, and I didn't want to continue struggling in this whirlpool of pain. I looked at my husband. His face was full of guilt and remorse, and the look in his eyes made my heart ache. Once I thought that our life, although uneventful, was stable and happy, but now it has all been shattered by the cruel reality. "Let's go," I said, holding back my tears. My husband seemed to have not expected me to make such a decision. He was taken aback at first, but then a gleam of joy flashed in his eyes. "Okay, let's go home," he said, walking quickly up to me and reaching out to take my hand. I instinctively avoided it. His movement froze, and the smile on his face froze as well. But he didn't say anything and just followed me silently. I looked back at the gentleman vampire, his eyes filled with loss and reluctance. "I'm sorry," I said softly, "it's all over now." He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but in the end he didn't make a sound, just nodded slightly. We turned to leave, but just then the female vampire's voice rang out again. "Want to go?" "It's not that easy." Her voice carried a hint of mockery. "Do you think that knowing the truth will let you get away scot-free?" I stopped in my tracks and slowly turned around to look at her. There was no fear in my eyes, only determination. "What more do you want?" "I have already become your instrument of revenge. Aren't you satisfied?" I questioned. The female vampire sneered. "You must pay the price." As soon as she finished speaking, the vampire guests around us slowly gathered around us, surrounding us. My husband clenched his fists and a determined look came into his eyes. "Today, no matter what, I will take Ellie away." His voice was firm, but I could feel his tension. Just at this critical moment, the lights in the hall suddenly flickered, and then a strong flash of light flashed, and the guests all covered their eyes with their hands. Taking advantage of this opportunity, my husband took my hand, and we desperately ran towards the door. Behind us, we could hear the angry cries of the female vampire and the guests chasing after us, but we didn't look back, just kept running. Finally, we burst through the heavy door, and the night wind outside blew on our faces, bringing a slight chill, but it made me feel incredibly clear-headed. We ran wildly in the night until we could no longer hear the sounds behind us, and we stopped. I leaned against my husband, breathing heavily, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know what the future would hold, but at least we had temporarily escaped from a place full of danger and intrigue. And our marriage, which had been shattered during this thrilling experience, would have a long and difficult road of repair ahead of us. When we returned home, everything was just as we had left it, warm and peaceful. But at that moment, I felt that everything had become so unfamiliar. I slumped onto the sofa, unable to stop the tears from flowing. I was exhausted both physically and mentally, and I felt like I was about to collapse. My husband stood there, at a loss for words. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but didn't know where to begin. After a long while, he slowly walked over to me and whispered, "Ellie, I'm sorry. I've dragged you into this disaster and caused you so much harm." I looked up at him. His face was full of exhaustion and remorse, and his eyes were full of self-blame. Once I loved this man deeply, but now, after all this, my feelings for him have become complicated. "Why didn't you tell me about your grudges with those vampires?" I asked hoarsely. My husband sighed and sat down next to me. "I was afraid that you would worry and that I would lose you. I thought that those things were in the past and would no longer affect our lives." There was a hint of helplessness in his voice. "I was too selfish and didn't consider your feelings." In the days that followed, we were both caught in a silence. I no longer asked him about his well-being as I used to, and he no longer cared for me as much as he used to. It was as if there was an invisible wall between us, preventing us from getting close to each other. But time is the best medicine. As the days passed, we both tried hard to adjust our mentality. I began to re-examine our marriage and recall the bits and pieces of our past. Those good times were like warm sunshine, little by little dispelling the gloom in my heart. My husband also tried hard to make up for his mistakes. He took on more household chores and came home early every day to spend time with me and the children. When I was in a bad mood, he would silently stay by my side and listen to me. When I was sick, he would take good care of me and let me feel his love and care. Gradually, our relationship began to improve. I stopped speaking coldly to him, and he stopped being cautious around me. We started to communicate again and get to know each other's thoughts and feelings again. One evening, we were sitting in the living room, watching the children play nearby, and both of our faces were filled with smiles we hadn't seen in a long time. "Ellie, let's start over," my husband suddenly said. "Forget the past and rebuild our happy life." I looked at him, tears glistening in my eyes, and nodded. "Yes, let's start over," I said softly. Since then, we have really started a new life. Although occasionally we still think about that terrible feast and the bloodsuckers, and there is still a little fear and unease in our hearts, we have chosen to face it bravely. We believe that as long as we love and support each other, we will be able to overcome all difficulties and usher in our own happiness. And that experience will also become a memorable part of our lives, reminding us to cherish the present.